Hi, I'm James McGuire, and on today's eSpeaks, we're talking about the Internet of Things, IoT, along with some of the other key emerging technologies that are driving enterprise IT, including cloud and artificial intelligence. To provide insight into that, I'm joined by a very special guest. With me is Vishal Gupta, Chief Information and Technology Officer at Lexmark. Vishal, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, James.
Let's take a look at the enterprise IoT market. I find it to be a really interesting market. There's so much going on, all those sensors out there from, your smartwatch to autonomous vehicles, traffic lights. I mean, what are a couple of key trends driving IoT in 2022 as you see it?
It's a great question, James. And I wear an Apple Watch, so I'm certainly, it's one of my favorite IoT devices, if you may. Actually,
Right.
brings real change, right? I've been trying to be more healthy, and it's sort of constantly sensing and telling me what I'm doing and how I'm doing it and what I can do better,
Hmm.
right? Which is what I think the potential of IoT lies. So, James, if you think about it, right, we've been talking of IoT for some time. But the way we have been measuring progress in IoT is how many devices will be connected and by when, right? We've
Hmm.
had this, oh my God, we've got 20 billion devices connected. It's going to be 30 billion,
Right.
as if that's really been where the focus is. And, somebody would say, so what, right? Why do I care so much that the number of devices will go from X billion to Y billion? And so I think the time has come really for a transition and inflection
Hmm.
where, in addition to the consumers who are connecting more and more devices and companies, people are thinking about IoT not just like a science fair,
Hmm.
but really as something that's transformational, something that what you saw cloud do, right, in terms of truly becoming a mainstream piece that fundamentally impacts the business strategy.
Hmm.
And if you think in the background, what's happening with the ongoing pandemic, we've got the supply chain issues. And so the corporate leaders are under a lot of pressure to show progress, right? With all of these headwinds that they've got, right? We hear about the talent challenges, the supply chain challenges, all the pandemic challenges. And so if I think about, we're in January of 2022, and I think people are all starting to kind of think through not just how do I survive, which was the initial focus around this whole piece with the pandemic, but how do I thrive? How do I play the long game that's
Hmm.
going to make me more successful as a company, as an organization, as a community? And so they're really thinking about what they invest in, what will be the margins on that, how do they facilitate a healthy culture, and how do they really embrace these innovative technologies? And I think that's what the future really holds for IoT, that kind of inflection from that science fair focus on number of connected devices to true business outcomes. Now, I think as people and companies are embracing, okay, this is something that we've got to do to really drive that competitive advantage, they're really faced with two questions. How do it? Do you invest in building all of these technologies yourself, and or do you partner with somebody who's got it and who's got all of those user friendly interfaces and the analytics and the ability to massage all the data? Because if they don't do that, they're going to be at a disadvantage. And then I think the second question they're facing from a trend perspective is not so much IoT in isolation, but IoT and other emerging technologies together. So
Hmm.
how do they use IoT as the foundation from that connectivity, to get more and more data, but then also leverage things like the cloud and AI and 5G and machine learning to really drive them all in conjunction in an intersection way so they can truly achieve competitive advantage and drive real business outcomes. And so that's how I see the trend shaping up for 2022, James.
That's really interesting about IoT not existing in isolation, IoT along with other technologies. And you mentioned cloud there, which is interesting. Let's shift to how companies are using the cloud. I know that Lexmark uses Microsoft Azure and AWS as its cloud providers. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. But what advice do you give companies to optimize their own cloud usage? You may have seen some snafus along the way.
Snafu would be a nice way of putting it, James. So there are, it's interesting, as you know, I wear two hats, right? I wear the CIO hat where I'm working for my 8,000 employees and thinking about how do I create great experiences for them. And cloud is clearly the vehicle on which we build on top of which we build a lot of the capabilities. And we've got big investments in both Azure and AWS, right? So we're a big consumer of both. In fact, we started to also consume things from Oracle cloud infrastructure as well. And so we are what you could describe as a hybrid multi-cloud consumer, right? Hybrid because we still have data centers,
Right.
multi-cloud simply because of AWS, Azure, and Oracle.
Right.
And as I talk to my peers, James, I'm not alone, right? I'm actually in the majority of companies of our scale because there are workloads that need different pieces, and so you really have on one way lots of choices, another way lots of confusion, right? Too much diversity, and so there's companies like who've done research like RightScale, and they say, all of this great cloud spend that we're having, and it's great that AWS's stock price is going up and Microsoft is,
Right.
we're wasting a lot of it, right? We're wasting apparently about as much as 45% of it.
Wait,
And,
waste the cloud capability? When you say waste, what exactly are you wasting?
Well, we're wasting the cloud spend, right? We're overspending on the cloud versus what we could, right? And as you think about your cloud spend, you have to really think about it and not just the public cloud itself, but also in private cloud buckets, and then also in things like software as a service, platform as a service as well, right? And so you've got to really add up the spend across all of those and say, am I really optimizing it? And so as you think about what does it take to optimize the cloud spend and drive real progress, there's really 3 or 4 pieces that you have to really think in mind, right? The first fundamental piece is many times the cloud spend has come from lift and shift, right? So you sort of lifted the VMs that exist in the data center and you've put that in the cloud.
Right.
And so you're really saying, in the data center, you didn't need to think about shutting down every workload because of sunk cost, right? I bought a server, and now whether or not I shut down the workload if I'm using it is not that big a deal because that cost is already gone. Sure. But in cloud, the clock is ticking. And so what we find when we first move to cloud is, we have to change. People love cloud because of agility, but agility is a two-edged sword. I can spin up things fast, and it's decentralized. In the past took time and centralized, right? You came to IT told you, give me a week and I'll get you a server of your choice and I'll virtualize it for you and you got it, right? Now you could spin it up in minutes, but now because anybody can spin it up and they forget to spin it down, you've got all of these things running that you may not need.
Right.
Whether it's for prototyping, whether it's for other things. So that's one piece that people don't quite realize as they embrace cloud, that they have to change that model where they want the agility, but they also need to put some level of governance on, are we shutting things down, especially the VMs that we don't need. The second is they need to become more strategic. Those procurement departments can't really come into play in the cloud because once you're in, it's like every workload has a certain cost associated and sticking. And so what you've got to think about is, if there are long-term workloads that you've got, can you buy them instead of getting what I call spot instances? So the nice thing with cloud is that you can burst up and down. The bad thing is everything doesn't cost the same money. And so if you reserve and plan beforehand, those reserve instances cost almost 40 to 50% less than the spot buys. And so you've got to really plan, how much capacity do I know at a minimum I'm going to really be needing, and do I reserve that in advance? And then use the bursting capability for the spot instances. And so you're really not thinking of all as same, but really thinking in that way. That's the second way you could do it. The third interesting way happens to be that, we live in a capitalist economy. It's all about the competition, and that the vendors notice too. And so if your workloads are designed to be able to move them across clouds, you could clearly negotiate better pricing, right? And so you're designing, wearing your CTO hat, or you're designing your workloads. So, whether you're using a Google Anthos or one of the VMware technologies or any other greater technologies that enable you to build what I would call as cloud neutral workloads, maybe on top of containers, are you developing it like that? Because that will let you, again, negotiate, in a better way across, especially if you are in that multi-cloud hybrid world. And then finally, I would say it's a lot about security, because the security, and especially if you can automate your security policy, that'll give you the confidence that from the stakeholder perspective, and also it'll give you better control. And sometimes if you're not thoughtful, you could also do things like you might be logging too much, and that might create a lot of expense itself that might not even be needed. And so making sure you've got that right balance as well, right? So all of these things, I think, James, can help in uh, not only getting the benefit of the agility that the cloud brings and the innovation that the cloud brings, but also get a check on the cost that most companies get surprised when they start getting the cloud bill. And a lot of that gets wasted, and these four strategies can help you get over that.
I think the idea of negotiating is an idea that people are thinking about in the C-suites all across America, all across the world. I mean, trying to negotiate with the big cloud vendors is definitely a key activity for this year. Let's talk about some of the challenges that companies deal with as they work to combine cloud and data and artificial intelligence. All this is very complicated, very challenging.
Mhm.
What advice would you give to people? Is it a planning or staffing issue? How can they move forward in this area? Combining the big key emerging technologies.
Yeah, and it's a great question. So, earlier we talked about that. I think 22 brings that inflection point
Mhm.
from that science fair approach to that, kind of thinking long term, really thinking about the business outcomes and what you do.
Mhm.
And so I think as you are on that journey and you're thinking about what strategy to take to create that competitive advantage for your company, you're faced with a couple different things, right? How are you going to connect all of those devices that you've got in your enterprise?
Mhm.
How are you going to get the data from those devices? How are you going to clean up all of that data? How are you going to have that skill set, right? This is not traditionally a skill set that people have had, whether you're thinking about streaming data or many petabytes of data, and what's the most effective way of storing the data, because you could create a very big bill for yourself. You could create a security nightmare for yourself as well.
Mhm.
And so, there's a lot of pieces involved in it that are both technology related challenges, that are skill related challenges, that are regulatory related challenges. And then most importantly, you could all do all of that, but the big thing is, so what, right? Even if I got all the data and let's say I was able to create some machine learning models and I was able to create some dashboards, what is the so what? And that's all around the business outcomes that we talked about, right? That could it really help you make more money or save money or improve customer satisfaction or solve your supply chain things? And so, we've had the advantage at Lexmark that we've been on this journey for maybe 10 years already to sort of
Mm.
perfect uh, both the intersection of these technologies, right? Initially, obviously, when the public cloud was not, that was private cloud. Now, for the last several years, it's been public cloud.
Mhm.
Along with AI, we've stood up this thing called the data science and analytics team. And we've, spent a lot of time in figuring out what are the right business outcomes we could be creating. How do we extend the life of these devices? How do we create how do we really transform business that can become more recurring with the use of IoT? And so I think that is the advantage of that's the sort of, I think, uh, advantage of an approach that allows you to partner with somebody like that, who instead of you having to learn all of those things the hard way, who can kind of give you that head start, if you may, right? Can create that competitive advantage for you. So that's where we have created the platform. We've created that accelerator suite, so that way you can realize those business benefits and the values. We've thought through things like, what are those business process templates? What are those machine learning models? What are those reporting dashboards? What are those algorithms? And how do we configure them so that way it could work on your environment? And how do we help you put all of those things together, and where we're not just giving you the platform, but we're giving you those accelerators, and we're giving you the professional services of people who've actually been in that same business, right? We've been in that connected devices business. We understand what our customers of that particular type of business model look for, and how do you then create those business outcomes. And so I think the net of it is, you've sort of got to decide as a company whether you're looking for an IoT experiment, which is where a lot of the IoT uh, sometimes can exist, or an IoT experience that creates a competitive advantage. And based upon deciding which of the two places you want to be in, will sort of net out what approach you want to take.
I think certainly the piece there that will really resonate is the idea of partnership. Companies can't do it all by themselves. They need partners. I'd say that's going to be one of the big themes for the years ahead is who do you partner with and why? Which brings me to the idea of looking to the future. I'd love to get
Mhm.
your sense of where we're going in the next few years in terms of enterprise IT. Is there a milestone or so, or how can companies get ready for what's coming in the next couple of years?
Yeah, it's I love, kind of thinking about the future, thinking what the world has in store for us.
Hmm.
There are a couple of interesting things happening from an enterprise IT perspective, James, right? The first thing is, all our talent now has, we sort of talk about how the talent transformation has happened, right? The talent, I think the equation has flipped a little bit, right? Because I think there's now more power, I would say, in terms of there's more opportunity, right? The
Hmm.
location is no longer the differentiating factor.
Hmm.
And so that I think is giving people more choices in terms of who they can work for. And so I think companies have the opportunity, on one hand, they have the opportunity of tapping into a far bigger talent pool that they never had before. On the other hand, I think they also have the challenge of now they have far more competitors than they ever had before. And so how do they, I think, invest in their talent, whether it's in technology skills, whether it's on the mission, whether it's in terms of flexibility and engaging kind of digital transformation tools that will let the talent succeed, right? And I think that is a new thing the companies have not faced before, where we see a lot of things and you hear a lot of things about like the great resignation wave and all. And I think there's a way to actually tap that to help you, or if you're not careful, it'll hurt you, right? And so the companies need to be, I think, a little bit thoughtful about, are they transforming with the times from this talent change perspective? And so, for example, some of the things that we've tried to do, James, have been, we've thought a lot about how are we going to really upskill our teams,
Hmm.
right? And so, for example, we have even partnered with people like the North Carolina State to launch programs where we have kind of created, partnered with them, and kind of in the spirit of partnership again, we have sort of partnered with North Carolina State to create like an AI academy, and
Hmm.
we've been training like 25 data scientists who actually get trained every day.
Hmm.
uh,
Okay.
they actually have a training from 5 to 9 p.m. every day.
Hmm.
Those people are self-selected. They're investing, they're not all in technology. Some of them actually sit in finance, some of them are sitting in HR, believe it or not. But
Hmm.
we have these people who are investing in their learning because they can see the future. They can see how important things like data analytics, whether they're coming from IoT devices or whether they're coming from other things, will be, right? So I think talent is, I think, one big area that I think is going to fundamentally change, not just in the location of whether it's going to be home or in the office, but just how the talent interacts with you, and how you sort of use it to create those experiences that we talked about.
Hmm.
The other big sort of change, if I look at from a crystal ball perspective, is I think, we've been talking about digital transformation a lot in the past years. I think it's gonna, some people have said that the pandemic has accelerated the digital transformation by several years.
Right.
And that's because, people used to think about, do I do cloud or do I not do cloud, right? Well, with the pandemic, you didn't really have the opportunity to put experts or go yourself to your data center. And so if you wanted to get something done, you really had to embrace the cloud in a much more way,
Right.
right? And so similarly, you had to embrace data much more way because your people are all distributed. You had to embrace zero trust from a security perspective in much more way. You had to sort of integrate IoT with all of these things because heck, you wouldn't really, you know, be able to really provide those experiences otherwise, right? And so as I look at this crystal ball, I think in addition to this talent transformation, I think the digital transformation, whether you are a bricks and mortar company or a digital born digital company, has just become much more. And we have seen how many of the retailers were actually able to fight, where at one time people felt that they would become legacy, but they have embraced digital transformation, many of them, and they've been able to fight that challenge very effectively and transform their business model very effectively, right? And so I think that's the second big thing that's really happening in addition to the talent transformation, that the role of technology folks has fundamentally transforming more in the company, because people are regarding them more than just folks who are IT or who have a certain cost, to really people who are core to the business. Digital transformation is core to survival, is core to transformation, and it is, no longer about, you know, can we afford to do this? It's almost like, you know, this is central to your strategy. This is, as critical as sales used to be, as critical, right? So sort of getting to that same pedestal that we have not had before. So those are the big things that I see from a IT sort of crystal ball perspective, that the role of IT, I think, is truly transforming, not just to partner with the business, but to also help transform that business, because the digital transformation is changing. And then I think I see a huge change from a talent perspective, both in how you attract, retain, and develop the talent, because if you don't, that talent has a lot of opportunity that they've not had before.
Michelle, I think you really said it. I mean, certainly that talent piece, I think of it sometimes as the talent wars. It's certainly going to be a big role in the year ahead. And of course, digital transformation, no doubt about it. Well said.
Right.
Michelle, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts today. I learned a ton. It's going to be interesting to watch the sector as it goes forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking to you.